Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this web session being organized by ICMEI Social Auditors Organization. This is continuing with our efforts of knowledge updation and providing exposure to all the social auditors as well as the aspirants with the developments taking place in the social space, and also providing them latest updates and knowledge with regard to various dimensions of social sector, social audit, social accounting, and things like that. We have been conducting these kind of seminars and webinars regularly, almost every week, sometimes even more than one during a particular week. And we are so very happy to have been engaged in providing knowledge updation to various members spread across pan-India in this particular important dimension. It is my pleasure and honor to provide a brief introduction of today's speaker, Madam Pushpa Aman Singh, who is the founder of GuideStar India. Madam Pushpa founded GuideStar India in 2009 after having established India's first online giving portal, Give India, as its chief operating officer. She crossed over to the social sector after a decade of innovation and growth in India's financial services sector. The company that she has founded, GuideStar India, is India's largest and most reliable NGO information repository, enabling greater giving through trust and transparency. She has established GuideStar India as a friend of the NGO community, working with them to embrace transparency and enhancing their capacity to access philanthropic resources. With more than 11,700 Indian NGOs showcasing their work on GuideStar India, with reach to over 150,000 NGOs, GuideStar India helps users find reliable NGOs of their choice and also supports research on civil society, and also contributed to India's most comprehensive NPO sector survey. In 2015, Madam Pushpa launched a rigorous due diligence program to certify NGOs, which has now come to be recognized as the gold standard for identifying credible NGOs, and is used by a number of intermediaries such as Dasara, Global Giving, ATE Chandra Foundation, Samhita Good CSR, and Mastech Foundation. Madam Pushpa launched in India Give Tuesday, a global giving movement to promote generosity through collaboration and innovation. Earlier, as the Chief Operating Officer of Give India, Madam Pushpa played a significant role in getting NGOs in India to participate in retail fundraising. Through her pioneering work at Give India, she demystified online philanthropy by working out simple yet effective ways of making disclosures and reporting back to donors. Madam Pushpa is on the SEBI's Social Stock Exchange Advisory Committee and Mumbai Stock Exchange Social Stock Exchange Governing Council. Madam Pushpa is an MBA Gold Medalist and a Senior Global Fellow of St. George's Institute, New York. Madam, we heartily welcome you to handle this session today for the benefit of various people who have qualified the social auditors examination already and those who are aspirants. We are eagerly looking forward to your deliberations on the subject of today's webinar. Over to Madam Pushpa, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Gupta ji. I hope I'm audible.
Yes, ma'am. Yes.
Okay, I would also need you to allow me to share my screen I'd like to
Okay.
use a presentation.
Sure.
While that happens, I really want to thank, Gupta ji for pursuing this session and this conversation. I also need to thank Jyotsna ji. By now, you all would be familiar with her, for suggesting that I do this session today.
Yes.
I look forward to a very stimulating session because, we've been talking about this report and these findings at different fora. And I think this is one of the groups that would be in the best position to kind of, push back, if I may say so, on some of our methods and findings. And at the
Sure.
same time, I think you will be able to put it to perhaps the best use, given
Yes,
that you all are raring to, work with this sector, to be as assessors, auditors. Some of you might help organizations, I suppose, in getting themselves ready for the social stock
Yes,
exchange
please.
or presenting their impact, and some of you may be on the assessment side. Whatever the case may be, I hope that the sharing the findings of our study will give you a good contextual understanding. When you visit A, B, C organization, you would be able to kind of see them in the perspective of what the sector looks like. Also, what is the place of civil society organizations or the non-profit sector in India's nation building. So one,
Yes, please.
the sector in overall context of India, and you would be able to look at the organization you're assessing in the context of the sector. So, some amount of benchmarking also has been the idea behind this. And India is one of the few countries internationally to have done this. We always look at the US, the UK, and some of the developed markets, and we say that, they have all the data. I spent, as Dr. Gupta kind of patiently read out, and you all heard my fairly long introduction, is that I've been in this space for now 2 decades, and I came from the for-profit sector. So initially, my own understanding of the sector was very limited. And I thought that perhaps India is not kind of internationally at the forefront as far as perhaps this sector is concerned. But in the last few years, it's only been more and more clear to me that kind of the development sector in India is at the forefront internationally in this space, whether it comes to due diligence, whether it comes to even the kind of practices the sector follows. And we have one of the largest non-profit population, like, our human population. And but in terms of the imagination, the innovation with which problems are being solved, in the vibrant democracy that we have, and the kind of consultative and collaborative processes that have been followed, I think in the development sector, a lot of people look to India. And GuideStar is actually the organization I founded in India, has been in the US for several years, now more than 3 decades. And the founder of GuideStar in the US said that if that concept works in India, then it has global relevance, because India is like a laboratory where the most challenging situations, any parameter you take, everything is present in the Indian context. And if we can make something work in the development space in India, it has great relevance for other countries. So as I speak, there are African nations, there are Asian economies that are looking to us to learn how we made our repository work in India. So with that, let me kind of share my screen and take you through a very structured presentation on what several organizations and leaders and entities in this sector have been working on in the last 6 months or so. Is my screen visible to you all? I think I got a message.
Yes, please. Yes,
Okay.
please. Yes.
Okay. So this is basically a report that has been published called India's Million Missions. And this is part of a larger study about the nonprofit sector. And I'm privileged to be presenting the findings today to you, but I want to acknowledge that it's a part of the effort of what we call CSO Coalition at 75. There are more than 15 entities. And this research is based on the participation of more than 1,000 NGOs and NGOs from across the country. So who they are, what we found, etc., I'll just walk you through in a bit. So I don't know if you all have come across this book by Mrs. Rohini Nilekani called Samaj Sarkar and Bazaar, a citizen first approach. And by now in the sector, everyone uses this term Samaj Sarkar and Bazaar, largely inspired by what Rohini ji has been saying over the years. And we all believe that for a strong India, for any strong country, you need the participation of all these three. And while India is celebrating India at 75, the sector's contribution doesn't get acknowledged or mentioned. And therefore, people in the sector said that, we need to come together and at least put the data out there. The data will lead to the proper narrative. Otherwise, it's kind of, because our sector by its own nature is voluntary, works with very frugally with small amount of money. We really don't spend on our own image building, or we don't have a formal PR effort that goes into telling the story of the sector as a whole. And so when we came together, one thing that we all felt very acutely over the years, and for me personally in the last 2 decades, is our credibility is questioned in every single forum. I'm sure even when you are undertaking this, your journey towards social assessment, etc., often, there would have been a certain amount of cynicism in your mind about, is this sector really about do-gooders, change makers? Are these people really making any change? And you usually, the attention we get in media, of course, during COVID, it was about the contribution of the sector to serve the last and least. But otherwise, typically something has gone wrong, FCRA license nikal gaya. There is a probe against this organization. So for all the bad reasons, kind of we grab the headlines. So one, we said we must address the issue of credibility that comes again and again. The second thing that has been going on over the years, and some of you are also, chartered accountants, you might be auditing nonprofits. You would have seen that the compliance requirements are going up. So if you were to look at ease of doing business or ease of doing good, there's no longer any ease. It's getting far more difficult. In fact, some nonprofit leaders have been wondering whether they are better off being a for-profit business with a social purpose. And there's a social stock exchange also has a category called FPEs. So people are seriously wondering whether from NPOs they need to become FPEs, because the amount of energy, financial resources, but our time, human time and talent that is so limited for this sector gets consumed in compliances. And we are hoping that the SSC and the work that some of you do will address the issue of credibility and will hopefully improve, or reduce the difficulty in meeting our compliances. And the third, like I said, our contribution is not discussed because possibly it is not being valued. There are initiatives on, towards even, and I think some of you should get associated in a conversation called Pay What It Takes. So Britspan, one of the organizations that works in nonprofit consulting, is pursuing something called Pay What It Takes, and you could look that up on Google, and trying to say, how do we help nonprofits even do proper costing, because there's very little understanding on what are true costs, what are the direct costs, what are the indirect costs. Wrongly, people's expenses are classified as overhead instead of program, and some donors and funders typically put a cap on admin expenses, on overheads. And because nonprofits don't get really the best of, accountants or auditors, they end up not paying much attention to financial management. And especially, I would think there's a big role for cost accounting, because for the little while, 7.5 years that I was at Give India, we used to craft donation options, small units that people could support out of a larger program. And when you start unitizing, I often found that NGOs were asking for less money than what their true cost was, simply because they did not identify what is their direct and indirect cost. So you see, there's a lot that you guys can do to actually help this sector, because if you ask for less money and you end up spending more money, then there are cost escalations, and then there are doubts in the minds of donors. So I'm going to actually try and relate this presentation also to typically to your role and what you might be doing. And then we have, I think, about 90 minutes. So we'll have lots of time for Q&A. And I'm also happy to share this deck with you all. And I guess this is being streamed on YouTube as well. So what the sector together said is, let's come together, let's document, credible evidence based on really data from ground up as well as through secondary sources to get economists and researchers and experts from within the sector to look at the findings and be sure that we are presenting actually something that when it is scrutinized by people, we really have answers to it. And we put out a report in the public domain for people to study, discuss, ask questions, which is already done. We also want to widely disseminate this report. And thanks to you all for the opportunity to do this with your group today. And we want to be engaging in conversations in a very constructive fashion with all our stakeholders. So not just our donors and the community who we are out to serve, but also, teams, our networks with, the fraternity like you all who want to kind of audit and check what we're doing with government, with media, with everyone who is interested in doing good or in even questioning the doing good. So this is not a one-off exercise, but by the time we complete one round of this, we are hopefully looking forward to repeating this every 2 years. So this study that the coalition carried out actually has 3 components. And I will, so one is estimation of economic value of the NPO sector. And this was done by an expert research organization in Delhi called SSER. And the second component of it was the non-profit survey, a primary research that GuideStar India kind of anchored. And the third is thematic reports on, some of the themes that you're seeing, and more reports are getting added. My presentation focus would be on the first 2, the estimation and the non-profit survey in great detail. The thematic reports have actually tried to capture the narrative and the change that has come about since independence to date, where, the work of non-profits have led to certain institutions that are now part of the government framework, certain legislations that were brought about due to the work of civil society. And those are fascinating reports that I would ask all of you to see, especially when you're assessing a not-for-profit, in a particular thematic area. I would say if you're looking at an organization working for animal protection or for the elder care, just go and look at that thematic report, and you would be able to place that organization in the context of what is happening in the development space in that particular thematic area. So switching quickly to, the estimation of what we add to the GDP, etc. So this sector, like I said, SSER has done this. We are using the term gross GVA, gross value added, and we are using the term GDP, which all of us understand, but gross value added is not what is understood in common parlance. If you look at the footnote, we are saying it is the output minus the cost of inputs. And those of you interested, if you read, the detailed chapter in our book, it kind of explains, first of all, what are the difficulties in estimation of non-profit work, the kind of sector to which we belong, and we are in the composite sector. And if you look at salaries and wages, already people in the sector are working at a deep discount to market value. Then you have the formal and non-formal sector within our sector, and a lot of unpaid effort in terms of pure volunteers and volunteerism, because of that is a big contributor to the work of this sector. So considering all of this, even the value that has been put here is very, very hugely conservative. And taking 2019-20, as the year for which this data has been put out, 3,560 Indian, billion rupees is what was estimated. And you can see how it has grown as a percentage to the GDP from 1.41 to now nearly 2%. And just to place that in context, if you look at the other sectors, you will see that, defense expenditure, you look at auto components, all of that is kind of in the same range, but we would never think that the non-profit sector contributes almost as much as the kind of contribution of the defense space. And if you take at the IT sector, or the amount of I would say detailing and data that you get with full reporting is about 7.5%. So I just leave it to you. You guys are from the costing side. I leave it to you to kind of imagine what could be the true contribution or the value add from this sector. So 1.94% 2019-20 is kind of really a very conservative estimate. So now to talk a little bit about the problems faced here. And so we are in the composite sector, so we are part of multiple subsectors. And for the composite sector, those of you who may have referred to the UN handbook for estimation of the contribution of the non-profit sector, one uses the satellite accounts, national and satellite accounts. And we also are part of the services sector. So, the services sector itself has challenges like, how do you measure services output? There are lots of issues with that. How do you measure in monetary terms? How do you incorporate, the inflation for value of services? And the difficulties on making measurements on the ground, and hence the use of a lot of indicators as proxies, for existence and growth of some of these for services. So this is not peculiar to the non-profit sector, but the issues with composite sector and services sector. And non-profit sector, we are in these buckets. And I already talked about the NPO wages, where, majorly we are volunteers. And what has been done in this study is formal wages is taken as 2/3 of what is paid for the for-profit sectors. And in case of informal wages, it is taken as 50% of the for-profit sectors. But from experience, I could say that payment made to people in the social sector is much deeper discounted than even this 1/2 and 2/3, especially if you go from middle to the top level. The non-profit sector's peculiarities, most of the work is intangible. What is tangible is also that the change happens over a long term and it's indirect. I'm sure you've had sessions earlier where Jyotsna ji is very articulate in explaining these things, and she must have explained to you all how change happens slowly over a very long period of time. And so many times you have to go back to even look at the indicators you set out to measure and how you were measuring. And the intangibles, again, are very difficult. How do you, so when you have intangibles and over a very long term, the change or the benefit is coming, how do you compute the present value of all of this? So given, these challenges that we have to work with, just 1 second, I'm facing a little bit of issue with my deck. 1 sec. Meanwhile, if there's anything urgent in the chat that I should be addressing, I would request Gupta ji to draw my attention. I'm not trying to look at the chat screen. And I think since I started, a number of people have also joined. The number of participants has more than doubled. So as a quick recap, I want to say that I am trying to present a study of the non-profit sector, the first of its kind that happened in India in 2022 and 23. It was launched at the Jaipur Literature Festival in January of 23. And since then, the coalition, a set of organizations from the non-profit sector who felt acutely pained about our sector's contribution not being talked about, leave alone being celebrated in the, not being celebrated and not even talked about when India is celebrating India at 75. And so grateful that we're talking about this today. So I was just referring to the 3 components of the study. The first one was about the estimation of contribution to GDP. And we kind of said the sector contributes nearly 2%. And in terms of the gross value added, it is 3,500 plus billion rupees, which is about 45 billion US dollars. Now, the NPO sector study was anchored by GuideStar India, the organization I founded in India, and we work primarily with non-profit organizations as our primary source of data and our primary stakeholder. We were supported in this survey by the IIM Ahmedabad research team led by Professor Ankur Sareen. They were our thought partners, knowledge partners, guiding us with how we went about the research plan, the survey tool itself, and post-survey analysis and presentation. And what I'm going to be talking about is the preliminary results of phase 1 of the survey. Phase 2 will be completed around the third quarter of this year, and those results will be added. All of this, the results will be available. The report is available in the public domain, and you can sign up for it to get your copy. And we'll soon be putting up the data through an interactive dashboard, which you can use to slice and dice the data. So how did we go about the survey, and who we surveyed? What was our approach? We've actually reached out to 200,000 nonprofits in the country. You would be aware that NITI Aayog has a public database called Darpan. That is actually the go-to database for the sector. It's a requirement if you have FCRA in this sector, and FCRA is the permission to receive foreign contributions. And if you require government grants, etc., you need to be on Darpan. And we made sure that every NGO in Darpan is reached out to, and through our coalition, also we reached far and wide. There were network organizations who reached out to their members, who further reached out to other members. So we've reached out to the nooks and corners of the country. The survey was conducted in SurveyMonkey with English and Hindi translations. In phase 2, we would be the survey would be available in 10 languages, including English and Hindi. We did emails, webinars, so somewhat this survey was quite online. I mean, the tool itself was online, and the outreach was largely online, though we did do workshops across locations. It was conducted between September to December, the phase 1. And while we received about 1,000 responses in those few months, we validated every response to be unique based on its PAN. So NGOs who responded had to disclose their PAN number. We validated them using their Darpan IDs. We validated them, those who said FCRA, we validated their status on the FCRA website. So this is not like a project where, the same organization is counted multiple times, and it's not a survey where anyone who was not registered as a not-for-profit, their records were removed. So we had 851 validated responses, and 515 were complete in all respects. You can imagine, when we are trying to learn so much about the sector, there were over 100 questions, and average 1.5 hours an NGO took to just respond to the tool. And through our conversations and WhatsApp groups and question and answers, follow-up phone calls, we understand that people have spent almost half a day in gathering the data. So more than 3,000 hours have gone in actually participating or bringing these answers into this survey. It covered all aspects of the organization. So in a sense, when you are going to be doing the social impact assessment, which is kind of the result, the survey was actually looking to various aspects, I would say, from resources to results and the circumstances and factors that govern. So right from, just give me a moment. Just give me a moment till I just bring up my thing again. Meanwhile, Mr. Gupta, do you want to tell me the questions on chat? I'll take a quick look at the chat and then start sharing my screen. Okay, I don't really see any questions.
Yeah.
You can see my screen, right?
Right. Yes,
Okay.
yes.
Okay. Sorry about that. Yeah. So we were talking about, it looks at where the organizations are working. We also had, questions about, the aspirational districts that NITI Aayog has identified. About 124 districts are already announced out of 128. Sorry, I'm having some problem with my, with the Zoom windows showing up everywhere. Let me just remove and close all of this. Yeah, sorry. So, what is the age of the organization, the size? So literally the attributes of these organizations. What does the workforce look like? And we have a whole lot of interesting findings around that, the activities. We talked about the questions of accountability, credibility. So how do they track already? What kind of mechanisms are deployed by the sector to know the results? Partnerships and collaborations. Sometimes the sector is accused of being very competitive or working in silos. And how did we withstand the impact of the pandemic? How has growth been over the last, in some cases, 5 years, in some cases, even over the last 15 years? That is the kind of time period we asked organizations to respond. So while like any survey or study, this survey is dependent on the response that came from participants. But like I said, we have actually gone about validating these NGOs. And in some cases, we've also kind of done some basic, triangulation of data to see that the findings are reliable. So let's take who constituted our sample. And we are happy to say that the 851 validated responses are quite representative of the geographical distribution of NGOs in the country. So what we find is that except for UP, where we have underrepresentation by 8%, and Tamil Nadu, where we have overrepresentation of 4%, you will see the map of India in green is actually what is the Darpan data distribution, and the one in the shades of pink is what our survey distribution has been. So it's kind of pretty much in sync with that. Now, if we take the top 3 states where nonprofits were working, so we asked them to actually respond to us saying which are the top 3 states of India where you work. We kind of found that 5 states of India actually constitute 50% of organizations. So if you go to, you take UP, Delhi, then Maharashtra, Tamil Nadu, Karnataka, that accounts for majority or 50% of organizations in the state. And also we found that organizations are pretty local in their operations. So 55% organizations work in villages, 54% work in the aspirational districts. And when we keep talking about nonprofits reaching the last and least served, this kind of connects very well with that. And almost 50%, that is 47%, focus of their work is one state of the country. They're not literally all over the place. At the same time, we find that 22% of organizations also work pan-India. So, when you find organizations participating on the SSE, perhaps to begin with, there could be these organizations that are pan-India that are working. So our sector also has a good mixture, I would say. While there are very locally focused organizations, there are also organizations which have like a national presence and fairly widespread work that goes on. We also saw that a great number of organizations are actually into direct implementation. So they're actually working at the last mile. So 94% organizations reported that at least 2/3 of their activities, again saying that they're actually serving communities that really need these services. So 2/3 said that they support the underserved, the underprivileged, or people working in geographies that have very low performance in the development indices. And 70%, like I said, the majority work in direct implementation. They support or providing direct support, or they have a community-based approach. As most of you would be aware, if you look at the Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation Report, which was which is kind of the report that threw up the 3 million plus non-profit organization population in the country, that uses the International Classification of Non-Profit Organizations, what is called ICNPO, the UN handbooks, etc., refer to that. So our survey also adopted the same classification system. GuideStar India uses the same system. However, since now everybody is tracking SDGs, we also asked organizations to report their work that they work, the areas where they work, against the SDGs as well. What our report shows is the themes of education. If you look at SDGs, predominantly people are working in providing quality education or good health, or targeting the no poverty goal or gender equality. If we take the ICNPO classification, 70% work on providing social services. Social services is a term in the ICNPO that captures providing services to elders, services to children and family, services to youth, etc., which are more beneficiary group focused, providing relief and services that directly impact them. These definitions are available in the report. Of course, education and health is a theme that is common to both the SDGs and ICNPO when we take the classification and where work is focused. 34% organizations are working, addressing environment, which is again a theme that is of great concern to everybody. We'll switch to looking at now the attributes in terms of age and size. So most of the NPOs are actually, you can say, young. Financial spending as size, organizations seem very small. So you need to keep that factor in mind. So being small is not necessarily bad. Also, when people are small, then the percentage that goes into straightaway program implementation is a larger percentage. So I would say the idea of my presentation today is to just make you aware of all of this, so that to the specific organization where you go and do your assessment, you have this in background and you apply the information in that context. A large number of organizations are not only less than 30 years old, but over half of them are actually less than 20 years old. So I'm hoping that they will have most of their records well documented, using at least certain amount of digital tools to track, to record their work. And as you know, all of us have to now file our income tax returns as well as our FCRA. All those compliances are online. The Charity Commission in Maharashtra requires everything to be submitted online. So people are fairly streamlined and so being smaller organization, there are numbers kind of hold for the size. And in fact, the SSC threshold to participate in the social stock exchange is 50 lakh plus of annual spending, and I think fundraising of 10 lakh rupees in the last 1 year. If you look at the number of employees in these organizations, half of them have 20 or more employees and 30 or more volunteers. But I won't be surprised if you find entities also with 5-member teams, less than 10 members, etc. Because again, when you start averaging, there are certain organizations which are very intensive in having large number of people in the last mile, and there are, depending on the nature of where you are in the value chain of being in implementation, it's also possible smaller organizations are doing fairly bigger amount of work. Let us now take a look at how many NGOs are there. So 3.3 million definitely is not the active number of organizations. And as you know, there are 3 types of legal entities. There is no legal definition of an NPO or an NGO. It's a derived term. So if we look at organizations by their form of entity where they cannot distribute profits to their own members or founders, if we take that as one element, the spirit of voluntarism, how these organizations are governed and whether they are for public benefit. So if you apply some of these, you could say societies, charitable trusts and Section 8 companies or earlier Section 25 companies are largely understood as not-for-profit organizations. And mostly these are the organizations that are covered even under MOSPI. So 60% of NPOs in our sample are registered as societies, 32% as trusts, and 8% are not-for-profit companies. I could say from experience that this represents how the distribution is population-wise. And Section 8 companies, that all the rules that apply to, as per the Companies Act, to other companies also apply to these organizations. Societies also are very democratically run with their AGMs, their elections and all of that. Trusts have been there, since 1950 is the Mumbai or the erstwhile Bombay Public Charitable Trust Act, Societies Act 1860. And so organizations some of them are very old, though we said that majority of them are younger organizations. Some of our NPOs, the oldest one I think on our portal was one that was founded in 1913. But these organizations, most of them are very democratically run, and they have all their documents that they make it quite easily and voluntarily available. We look at that in a bit. Now, from that 3.3 million, if we start looking at our relevant numbers, in fact, for the Social Stock Exchange, we said estimated about 19 to 20,000 NGOs would be eligible to participate. But if you look at, apply the very next cut, which is tax exemption, right? Because donations or contributions even through the stock exchange would typically, givers would want an NPO to be at least a tax exempt entity. So if you take Section 12A, 12A or 12AB, 92% of the NPOs who reported in our survey, they had this, but in reality, the data of 22nd November 2022 is that 252,000 NGOs in this country were tax exempt. And a further subset, I think 1.64 lakh are the ones who have ATG. And if you take FCRA, the ones with valid FCRA are 16,500 plus. So that's how kind of it breaks down to the relevant set for donors to give. Since we are not talking about foreign contributions as regards the SSE, but all these 252,000 organizations are tax exempt and they would be eligible. And as of now, ATG is also required. So very nearly you take 150,000 organizations. And then we are saying that only 50% have 50 lakh plus. So that's how you start breaking down. And then if you say how many of them have audited accounts, how many of them are tracking impact, etc., you start bringing that number down and it comes to about 19 to 20,000 organizations. So moving forward in our sample, actually, 50% entities had foreign contributions, but in reality, it is a much smaller number, right, as a percentage. So that's where some kind of bias can come into this. We also looked at, though 50% in the sample as such have FCRA, the organizations that are mid to large size, 78% of them had FCRA, and the smaller organizations, only about a third of them. Most of the organizations in our sample of 115 who reported are not promoted by government or business or trade associations. So they're really, I can say pure NPOs that are ground up, they have come up. This would be of interest to you, systems of accountability and their transparency practices. I, for one, when I came into this sector, and like wherever I walk into, also the biggest question is, do NGOs prepare accounts? Are they willing to share? And these kinds of questions. So 77% of NPOs said that their audited accounts, their accounts are prepared, audited, and publicly available. See, FCRA requires you to make your accounts publicly available on your website or otherwise, but income tax doesn't require you to do that. And NPO tax returns are still a private thing in India. But you can see what organizations are doing voluntarily. 77% said they make it available. And if you look at, how they are tracking and how their numbers look, we've also looked at it size-wise. But I would say for today, maybe we should not put so much of our energy into the size, the size versus how people are reporting. But broadly, what we can say is 84% NPOs said, 84% of NPOs who said that they track their directly reached numbers. They said for at least, in their sample, they said their numbers, reach numbers can be independently verified. So 84% of NPOs who track directly reach numbers for at least one of their activities, they said that their reach numbers can be independently verified. To me, that's a great signal because it means that the organization has a method of tracking and it can be verified. And if they can do it for one of their key programs, for the other programs, it can be done. Now, your question may be, why can't they do it for everything? There is a cost, monetary cost and the time cost that is involved in tracking. And not all donors really want to track every bit. When I used to work in Give India, I remember sometimes if we sent out a feedback report, a donor would say, oh my God, how much time and money would have gone into that? I really don't need that kind of a detailed report. And even for the SSC, when we did some consultations with donors who contribute large sums of money, they said, we really don't want the NPO to be put through the amount of pain and their time being taken away from doing work vis-a-vis measuring what they're doing, not to that granularity or to that extent, right? We'd rather prefer that going into doing more, reaching out to more. So I think for all of us here, it's very important to strike a balance. And I would really urge to you guys that when you go and do these assessments, try and see if there are simpler ways of tracking, if there are few key indicators to be tracked, even if the NGO is overdoing it, you might want to say, like, this was my experience, that oftentimes I would say, you look at these 3 things rather than looking at these 10 things, right? So you might be able to play a role there and you might be able to reduce the burden at the same time, get a better, sharper view of their work. So I would say it's very important for all of us to not lose our common sense. In fact, my understanding in learning development work is that if we have an open mind and the intent to do good is there, we can actually learn pretty quickly and be empathetic to listening to what people have to share on the ground. And together we can come up with indicators and how to track them and how to report them. And our background in whether management or accounting or costing, etc., can, in the process of audit, actually you can play a very constructive role of being a supporter, a mentor. So at Guidestar India, when we do due diligence and certification, actually we believe a larger part of it is capacity building. In every conversation that we have with the organization, even the list of questions that we put out, we give it upfront to them and say that this is what we need to know from you when we are doing our certification. In workshops, people have said, just knowing that this is what you're looking at, it gives us a moment to reflect and say, we must track this, or this is important, or how does this help, right? So I would say that use your assessment function as a way to help organizations, do better. And while you have to look at it with certain skepticism, certain independence, etc., I think you can still do a lot of good while making them go through this process. And in our assessment framework also, we're trying to help build loops of conversations, understanding, where we can bring about improvements, what is the organization's perspective, what they say they will take back and implement, where they can go back to look at the indicator and the way of tracking. So I think if we can build these learning loops in these assessment and audit conversations, it will be immensely valuable. The other thing, and maybe this is what you could also look at when you go and meet these organizations, they play a huge role in the, in lifting up the local economy. Half of the organizations, or more than half, so 55%, actually reported that more than half of their economic activity is with local business and vendors. And this happens for various reasons. I was very naive in my very early days in the sector. I also went to do I would say a monitoring and evaluation more than an impact assessment of a particular program. And I went to this organization that was doing a lot of work, in running camps for children's education. And their budgets were huge, and they were doing most of their sourcing from local vendors. And I thought, they're losing out on huge discounts that they could have got in their procurement directly from the manufacturer or the distributor. And when I brought this up as a suggestion and almost in a complaining mode, I was told that, you're missing out on local empowerment. Actually, the local teams, when they decide what is to be bought locally for the groups that they are managing, when they are handling these resources with a certain amount of responsibility and the decision making that happens locally, they made me aware of the cost benefit analysis that I was doing was lacking in looking at some of these softer aspects of benefits that were playing a role in strengthening or empowering that community. So I would say go with a bit of open mind in understanding, the cost benefit is not just monetary cost benefit. We need to actually find out approximations and what values we would assign to certain things. It may come in the narrative, if not in the numbers, but we need to be mindful of that. Almost 50% of NGOs said they're the biggest source of formal employment in more than half of the local geographies that they work. Isn't that huge? Who would think of nonprofits as an employment generator? I mean, we in the sector are very aware of that, but to the outside world, sorry, some of you may be already embedded in the sector. You may have your own NPOs, you might be supporting organizations and being their champions and advocates, but I'm addressing the general perception that people in the Samaj have about nonprofits. And simply, I might be naive, but assuming that you might be coming with that lens. So NGOs play a huge role while they work locally, more than half of them. In those half of the places where they work, they're actually the biggest source of formal employment. Now, what happens because of NPOs working with these local people? We also heard that 64% of NPO employees are sole breadwinners in their families. So see the kind of economic change that they bring about. Not just educating children, not just, the beneficiary group or the community that they are apparently addressing, but even in the process of bringing about the change in that whole value add cycle, they're actually doing so many more things. The other thing that we noticed is 67% NPOs report that more than half of the personnel that they work with come from the communities, the beneficiary community or the geographic community where they work. So the vendors, the people they employ, people being sole breadwinners. And then if you look at the graphic on the right, we also asked about socioeconomic status of employees when they start working with an NPO and what happens 5 years or more. And we were very careful in wording these questions. And just by the look of, the red and the peach colored bars, you can see that the number of the graphs are looking bigger in the middle to lower side, which means, the people, 34% said fair socioeconomic status. Now 34% are saying good, right? And 14% said poor, it's become 6% poor. The numbers in very good have gone up from 13 to 25. So overall, you will see, so 4% said, that the employees have not worked for at least 5 years, but otherwise you see how the socioeconomic status has changed. Now, the skills of employees. So when they start working in a non-profit, and what has been the skill improvement after 5 years? Again, you will see that the graph after 5 years, it's gone up for the good and the very good. And from my own limited experience, I could say by running our organization, all of this is true for us. I would say it's even true for me myself, that running an NGO, you do so many things yourself, and you work with such a frugal budget that you learn a lot more how to use technology completely. We squeeze out everything that's possible from basic MS Office rather than depending on custom-made software solutions. So there's a lot that happens in how we bring about change in the local economy and the staff that we work with. I'll pause here and just take a look at chat and then come into this segment on sources of funds. Is there an audio issue? There's somebody saying audio is not coming. Gupta ji, could you tell me?
Voice is very feeble.
All right, ma'am. All right. It's all right.
All right. Okay. Okay. That might be a local issue. Somebody says there's a breaking voice. I am working with a fairly good internet.
There is, intermittent, there is some break of voice.
Okay, I'm so sorry about it. I'm using a good connection and hoping that you'll be able to hear me. So coming to the source of funds, so we did talk about NPOs being relatively small, a vast majority, 62%, having annual budgets of less than 1 crore, right? Now, if you see the source of income, what we find is the smaller organizations, frequently they reported, now here I'm talking about 515 NPOs that they reported. Smaller organizations said that they depend more on self-generated revenue and individual donations, be it monetary or in kind. Medium to large organizations have grant support and CSR funding and support from foundations as their predominant sources. And CSR turns out to be really, and glad that the country introduced CSR, and CSR giving has been going up. So actually it is turning out to be a top source of funding, followed by grants from Indian foundations and international foundations. But since a vast majority cannot receive international foundations, I think, and we hope that Indian foundations and Indian high net worth individuals step up their giving, and we hope that, that contributions through the SSC doesn't qualify as yet for CSR. And really and FCRA is also out of it. So we're really hoping that the impact assessment and these kinds of elements that the social stock exchange requires, we hope that it brings about much more confidence among local givers, and more people step up to contribute to the nonprofit sector's work. And we hope it also, through your reports, etc., brings out the difference that these organizations make in the local economies and to really the underprivileged communities and underserved areas. Because through impact assessment, actually, you can make a powerful case or change the narrative about what is happening on the ground. And usually the work in the remote areas or work of nonprofits in general is away from the limelight. Like I said, the media stories tend to pick up when things go wrong and not when things go right. Of course, there are a few non-mainstream media that focus on reporting the good that is happening, or a couple of TV channels talk about the good news of the day. But we hope that you play a big role in bringing about these stories of change and good from the ground and putting it in true perspective. And I hope that today's session will stay with you, and over the years, our updates you will keep referring to and present what is happening in context. Like I shared my example with you, that I thought that the organization making local purchases was a bad thing. Maybe they could do a blended thing, but still missing the point of making local purchases and its impact on empowerment and local economy what benefits it drives to the local community, the economy, all of that I had totally missed in my initial years. So I think we're able to, it would be good if we bring that. What this report does show is that retail individual donations are still hugely untapped, and hopefully a mechanism like the SSC eventually will help deepen and widen the giving market in the country. A good thing that our report has been able to bring about is that the partnerships that nonprofits have with government institutions. So I said that, you know, in the funding side, we see that CSR and nonprofits, there's a big thing going there, and CSR is emerging as a big contributor. So going to one of my first slides on Samaj, Sarkar and Bazaar, that CSR funding is going through nonprofits to the community, shows the kind of collaboration that is there, or partnerships are there between corporate India and the nonprofit India. Between government and nonprofits, it's quite wide and deep. So 50, and it's not just restricted to one or two sectors. So you will see, be it education, be it health, be it community development, governance, there are these partnerships. So if you look at this, 57% of NPOs said they work with government schools. 44% are working with Anganwadis. Almost 50%, it's a 50% story, are working with health centers. They're working with self-help groups, with panchayats and municipalities. So the story is that there is this partnership going on, and still, why is the narrative not emerging? I think there needs to be more communication, more tracking and aggregating it and reporting it out and talking about the results. So when we come to collaborations again, we found that regardless of size, most NPOs work amongst themselves. So there's a lot of work that goes on between NGOs. They're active in networks, and larger organizations, understandably, are more active within networks. So there are lots of NPO associations, networks around themes, around geographies, and these networks, the NPOs actually have started using shared resources, but they're also kind of, so the primary motivation for collaboration with other NGOs is capacity building of their teams, improving their own service delivery, their knowledge, and achieving scale. So while many are small, they work together to achieve scale. For medium and large NPOs, collaborations, are more common with government. And purpose of collaboration with government, of course, is for funding, improving service delivery, and achieving scale and impact. 37% NPOs reported funding and 19% capacity building as the motivation for collaborating with businesses. So you'll see that, when they're working with businesses, even capacity building is something, and many companies in CSR also see employee engagement as a component. And we do think that, if we are open to not just giving in one mode and exploring giving in different forms, it does help. Now let us look at trends. 5-year trends, impact of COVID, and what we've seen is remarkable agility and resilience of the sector. We do come across cases where nonprofits had to wind up, where some of the small promoter-led organizations have had to look at other things. But we still don't have, one could say that when you did the survey, organizations that had closed down were not touched. But as a person running Guidestar India with 11,700 plus NGOs, we do track email bounces, we call up people to check. And our team has been calling people whose mails bounce, and it's a very tiny number. We are still to come up covering all the calls and come up with a number, but it's usually, like 1 in 100. They say that we have temporarily shut down and we're doing other things because we don't have resources. So hopefully in our next edition, we should be able to come up with a better number of what that's happened. But in the last 5 years, 58% NPOs said that their annual budgets have gone up, which means their capacity to influence change, I would say, has gone up. 56% reported that the sources of their funding, so that's kind of got diversified, there are more sources, and 78% said that their reach, the number of people, so not just the spending, but the lives touched has gone up, or the areas that they've reached has gone up. In terms of COVID, roughly 65% of small and mid-sized NGOs said that they did have losses, and half of the NPOs actually had an attrition in the aftermath of the pandemic. So it's not that they have shown resilience, but it's not that they have not been deeply impacted by this. We also have seen that NGO budget sizes grew because they responded, so they were agile and they pivoted their programs in the the post-pandemic scenario also to the on-the-ground needs during the pandemic. And I've seen several cases of NPOs who just responded to the crying needs of their communities. So if they were into education, they had to administer help people access healthcare at that time. They went out and did that. They used their mobility, their reach to put food on people's table and all of that. And fortunately, their supporters and their donors are not saying they moved away from their mission, because if their community doesn't exist, their community doesn't have their health, how are they going to absorb their interventions otherwise? And they've had a lot of challenge in putting kids back to school, in getting people back into their livelihood sources. There's still NGOs having to do a lot of work in that area. Among our respondent NGOs that were registered on or before 2007, we had 312 of them in the sample. More than half have reported an increase in their ability to achieve impact and to collaborate with other organizations. So we also wanted to see, over a longer horizon, a 15-year period, what has happened to organizations. So this is what the finding is. Now, how can we in general use the findings? I've tried to kind of relate it to your context as we were looking at various slides. But overall, if we see, I think regulators and ecosystem builders can apply the 80-20 rule for statutory reporting and compliance, not asking every single NGO to report on the same parameters. And even for the SSC, I would honestly appeal saying that we must make a distinction between not just registered and listed NPOs, but also NPOs based on size, because 50 lakh is a very low threshold. But once people come into the SSC, and I would appeal to you also, don't look at from the same, and I guess prudence will also say that, right, as auditors and others you would apply. A 5 crore plus budget NPO and a 50 lakh to 1 crore NPO, you will not apply the same amount of rigor in how they should monitor, evaluate, report, because of they initially also where they are in their life cycle and all of that. And I think those topics are being covered under different chapters or different sessions. But I would say let's not forget the 80-20 principle when we are looking at statutory reporting compliance. I would say even in impact reporting. Prioritize charity reforms, we would say, in the 5 states that account for more than half of the NPOs. Maharashtra has already taken a lead and has been working on what kind of charity reforms are required. And we hope it will become effective in the near future. It will be put into place in the near future. But I think at least these 5 states of India should accelerate the reforms that they can bring about. Design capacity building and support services based on age and size of NPOs. I think the SSC has a capacity building fund, NABARD and others who are going to think about it and allocate this. And I think you people also not only have a role to build capacity in your direct engagement, but your institute in its capacity building programs also can look at how this can also be extended to the non-profit organizations. For funders, I would say that they should definitely look at components for improving capacity and impact reporting when they are funding a program. So, like we are saying in the SSC also, in the, what do you say, your listing proposal, the fundraising proposal in the ask, they should already build into it the cost for impact measurement and reporting, because it's not a small amount. If I'm not wrong, I think Jyotsna ji had made us aware that it could be as high as 15 to 20%, and depending on the nature of the program and so many other factors. So it's important that if you become an advisor to a nonprofit, at the pre-listing stage, do make sure that they get their costing right and they provide for all this. And even if you're doing in the post-listing assessment, guide them and give them these inputs so that in their second, third, or the future listing proposals that they build up their fundraising proposal, they get this correct. Strengthening the NPO capacity and its effectiveness to deliver would really be a smart strategy for governments and ecosystem builders and funders. That there's better, that's a faster path to the socioeconomic improvement in the country, the local area development. And I just want to remind again that 50% of the organizations are working in the aspirational districts. Fostering collaborations and doing anything through, enabling regulation, funding, capacity building, etc. Anything that can be done towards that will be great. And creating resources for the sector, like I've been appealing to the institutes that make your tools, your frameworks, all of your programs available in these 10 languages to cover 80%. Like in our survey, we started with Hindi, English, but we would like everything to be translated into these 8 languages. So I hope you will build it into your institute's approach as well. And this could not just help the nonprofits, but I guess even among your members, you will be creating opportunities for members in the interiors. And the good news about working with the NPO sector is, English is not going to be a barrier. Like even when we are hiring our team members, if you know English, it's a plus, but if you know many other Indian languages, it's a huge thing. So let's kind of also tilt and, give advantage to non-fluent English speaking people the opportunity to be participating in these impact assessment, because those who know local language here are always at a much better advantage. Our appeal to NPOs is to use this data to establish where gaps exist so that they can build a compelling case for the work that they do and for benchmarking. From the other side of the table, I would say you can use this data to evaluate the nonprofit organization. That really brings me to the end of this. And whichever organization you meet, I would say encourage them to participate in sector studies so that all of us have better data. And this QR code, you can scan it to reach the form where you can request for the report. And all of our resources are actually available at this. Yeah. So that kind of brings me to the end. I'm happy to take questions after this. And phase 2 of the survey is on. So if anyone is interested in looking at the survey, we can go there. Yeah. Thank you. So I'll just stop sharing my screen. Yes. Mr. Gupta, would you be moderating the conversation? I'm not able to hear. I hope I'm audible. I can see one question from Mr. B.B. Prasad. If the PPT will be shared, the answer is yes. And another question, that is the sample size representative of the overall population? Is it commensurate with the number of the organizations? Yes. It is a representative sample in terms of geography, in terms of size. Where it is not representative, maybe in terms of the breakup of FCRA and tax exempt, non-exempt. Sorry, someone was speaking parallelly.
Madam, I have a question here.
किसी का background noise है, if you all can go on mute. हाँ जी, who's asking a question?
Yes, madam, this is Ashok Jain.
Yes.
Okay, I'm audible?
Yeah, you're audible. You could
Yeah,
ask.
madam, thank you. Thank you so much. I think very informative presentation
Thank you.
you shared with us. Now, I am also running one or two NGOs. My question here, say you have stated one data that there is a 1.94% contribution in GDP of NPOs, right? So here my question is that, and this has increased from 1.4 to 1.94. That is the other information you have given. So what is the further perspective? Because the increase is not that much speed is not there, or it's a very stagnant figure, number one. Number two is that, say, most of the NPOs are doing social kind of service, and in measurement of GDP, we need to measure the total product and services to arrive at the GDP of the country. So for NPOs and NGOs, because we are giving only, say, either for promoting education, maybe for promoting medical in the form of financial assistance, or maybe one of the NGOs is giving time to the senior citizens for their service of any kind. So there is no involvement of funding there. So in such cases, how we can really arrive at the contribution by those NGOs in the GDP? What can be the methodology? So two questions clearly. One is that further perspective, and then for such NGOs which are only extending social services in different areas, how we can measure the GDP contribution of such NGOs.
Yeah,
Yeah,
thank you. Great questions. What is going to be the trajectory is, 1.4 to 1.9 it has reached, and where it will grow. Honestly, I don't have an answer. At least an attempt has been made to kind of measure and see what the numbers look like. And I think with this awareness and with people like you and others questioning, I think at the apex level, everybody will start planning and doing something. And I also don't have the figures of this sector vis-a-vis others, what the growth has been in similar sectors. So very valid point. I will share this with SSCR. But I also welcome you to look at the report, the chapter 3 or chapter 4, which is on estimation. They have spelled out in detail their approach. And I would encourage you, we've also given an email ID for you to interact with Mr. Jasim Pius. Dr. Jasim Pius is the one who led this study, and welcome you to kind of engage in a conversation with him. What I understand is it's because we are a composite sector and we are in the services sector, and in monetary terms, everything doesn't happen, right? And like I said, also the gestation period is so long, you don't know how to compute for the intangibles, the net present value. So given all these limitations, they took a very conservative approach, and where they took wages, and the formal wages are there, they have taken 2/3 of the for-profit costs, and non-formal, they have taken 1/3. Because even if you compute wages, it is a very deeply discounted cost that is being paid to employees. So and you also don't want double counting, right? So if somebody has given an in-kind contribution, it is already in the part of the GDP in the person who purchased the asset. So you cannot now count in the bucket of the NPO. So there are these limitations that are there. And perhaps when we do this study, hopefully every 2 years, we will know whether, what we are missing, we can refine it. And this study is largely pro bono. So we had very meager resources, only the macro estimation and the NPO survey got partially funded. The thematic reports are all completely done pro bono. So we would welcome, in fact, some of you to even contribute in terms of your knowledge, to seek answers, ask questions, that is, and also make your suggestions on how this can be improved upon. So definitely do sign up for the report, and I'll also share after this, along with the PowerPoint, I'll share the email ID of SSER in the deck itself, so you can write to them. So the difficulty, I hope I've somewhat attempted to answer both your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Yeah, who's next? I think we have another 7 minutes or so for question and answers. Gupta ji, any other questions? Thank you all for the comments, appreciating in the chat. Of course, this encouragement really helps us to keep going. And do go through the report and give your critical comments so that, we can enrich the report in phase 2. If there are any top questions for which you have, okay, I got a question. Can we raise funds for small NPO regardless of size? You can, of course, raise funds for NPOs, not through the SSC. SSC is 50 lakh plus, but every organization definitely can raise money. But for the donors to get tax deduction, what we do require is that they, the NPO has an ATG, and there are, of course, NPOs with 1023C as well. So these organizations can give, 12A and 1023C are tax exempt, but NGOs with ATG can give the tax deduction. There are a few research organizations, of course, with deduction that they can give under 35(1), 2, 35(3), 1, 3, etc. Mr. Shyam Sundar, I think you want to connect. My email ID would be there in the deck. You can drop a mail. I can also give our email ID in the chat right now. Mr. Vinaykant Parikh says compulsorily impact assessment required. Could you just explain what you meant by that? Jyotsna ji, you would like to add any comments?
Hi, Puspa. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. So nice to get such a wonderful presentation we had today in terms of understanding the whole how the NGO ecosystem works. So thank you very much, Puspa, for giving this wonderful deliberation to all of us. I don't have any questions in particular, but certainly, the phase 2 would be very important, since I work from the government side also, especially, link for more, to be more, coming to a more transactional NPO as a more, better transactional entity to liaise with the government. I think your phase 2 survey would be very important. So I would like to definitely look more into that survey. And phase 1 survey also has brought lot of grounding in terms of understanding, how how the NPO fraternity is contributing to the economy across the value chain. That would also have a very good appreciation in terms of mobilizing the capital from Bazaar and Sarkar. I think that is very, very important. So beautifully explained with in the background of this Samaj, Bazaar and Sarkar. All of us, we need to move together to make a difference. So I think this, what I could see very pertinently is this report is a big move towards that direction to enable the ecosystem work by creating a thorough understanding of our NPS sector. Yes, thank you very much, Pushpa.
Thank you.
Thank you. So, if anyone has question now, or is there anyone from ICMI? Anyone from ICMI who would like to close this session? Hello?
Yes, madam, thank you very much.
Fine, fine. I think no one seems to be there. It's okay, very fine.
It's okay.
So, thank you very much. Pardon?
Thank you, madam, Pushpa madam and Jyotsna madam both.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
On behalf
I
of
can
all
give the
the,
email ID. You all can come back to us. Yeah.
yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you
very
so
much.
much.
I will share the presentation. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Jasmine.